My dad was a huge fan of comic books. He was the type that thought his old box of books from the 60s and 70s would go on to net us a fortune. It didn't. However, that old box of books worked a spell on me, and I became a fan too. We'd geek out over comic references in movies and TV shows, before they became the reason for the season. And multiverse stuff always struck a chord. The butterfly effect, you dig? If I'd done this, or they did that, what might be different? Most times, those stories are a mutual lesson for both versions of a character. But the inevitable outcome doesn't mean the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Welcome to My Dad, I'm Dad. A show for anyone who's ever loved and lost and anything in between. My name is Doug. Maxine isn't really a superhero fan, unless you count Super Grover. But she is super adorable, I'm biased, super curious, super capable, and requires superhuman levels of vigilance from me. I'm constantly thrilled to have the bond I share with my daughter. But I'll admit that choosing to be a stay-at-home parent was a way more demanding responsibility than I had originally anticipated. So, of course, there's some days that I wonder what life would have looked like if I'd kept working at the brewery. Well, no way to know, right? Wrong. Well, sort of. I sat down this week with Rob Mullard of Metazoa Brewing Company. Rob and I have more than a little in common. We both spent years in the brewing industry. We're new fathers to young daughters. We've got wives that make our lives worth living, and so on. There is one major difference in our respective parent origin stories, and I couldn't resist the urge to visit that mirror universe. So, take it away, other me. Rob, thank you so much for being here. How the hell are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. This is an honor and a privilege to join you.
Hey, man, it's my honor to have you on. I'm just really glad that we can have this conversation. And the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, how's things going with Metazoa? Can you tell the people listening what's going on there?
Yeah, things are good. A little hectic. We're a couple months into commissioning a new production facility involving a new brew house, a bunch of new, tanks and equipment. Our brew house is really sweet. Allows us to do a lot more things that also involve needing a lot more equipment. And so, new canning line, new centrifuge, a bunch of new lagering tanks. So it's been wild. You know, Starting on a new brew house, and anytime you get one of these new pieces of equipment, it's like starting a new job. An average week of work looks like sort of running around doing any manner of tasks around the brewery. We're kind of all heavily involved in packaging, on the canning line, running cellar work, with yeast, dry hops, cleaning tanks, and then just a couple of us that will actually run the brew house. But we're all pretty well versed in everything, and we have to be relatively nimble and able to bounce around and do everything, really. We run a pretty lean staff. Um, and so, just your average 50 to 60 hour week running around an unair conditioned warehouse committing manual labor. It's the best job in the world.
Now, Rob, it behooves me to mention that a lot of that seems like what it takes to be a parent. Would you say so?
Sometimes, yeah, yeah, it is. And that's, being a part of the management team at Metazoa is a bit like herding cats at times. And that's kind of what you deal with the child. It's sort of the nonstop sweaty running around, having to figure out how to do everything and fix every problem, and also while having no idea how to run around and do those tasks and fix those problems.
Right, right. It's a real learn on the job kind of environment, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, and having been in the beer industry before I, moved over to taking care of Max full time, that was just kind of the lay of the land. It was very similar to what you're describing, where every single day presents a new challenge and you have to deal with all those things. But in 8 to 10 hours, boom, you were good. Of course, you were going to worry about some of those things that you had left behind and what you were going to be walking into the next day. But for at least that little while, that was your hyper focus. Boom,
Absolutely.
I'm into this. And then you would go home, free
Yep.
kid, right? You go home and you're going to relax, or you're going to make some dinner and you're going to have a nice, chill evening. With your daughter, uh, I imagine that things have changed quite a bit. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. Sometimes sometimes I'm lucky and in the relaxation aspect. And she might be still napping, when I get home if I get home early enough, and so I'm able to catch up with my wife and talk about our day, and maybe open up a beer and kick up my feet for a few minutes before we get her up. But which is nice, but also literally the greatest thing in the entire world is coming home and like the look of excitement on her face, and she screams and she runs at me and she attacks me. It's the absolute best. But then you got to go straight into dad mode, which is after a day of work sometimes is you want that moment to relax.
Yeah. An old coworker of mine back when I was still at Founders, he would always say that when he clocked out of working at Founders, that he would go home and clock in again. And I think a lot of that is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about here, which is that the duality of like the two quote unquote jobs. You don't want to see your home life as a job, but unfortunately, when it comes to these children being the relative age of our kids, unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to remove one from the other. It's so much responsibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you get home and you got to clock right into dad mode, are there any tips and tricks that you've got, you know, for anybody listening, about how to just kind of re-gear your brain real quick? Do you have anything that you do there, or are you just like, all right, I gotta grin and bear it, I gotta grip it and rip it, and I gotta go, baby?
Well, really, and I will say that I have the massive benefit of an amazing wife who she's able to work from home, and so she tries to make sure Charlotte's in a good mood and fed and napped by the and like tries to get her at elite mode for me, and really we got super lucky. Charlotte's just an absolute doll, and is generally a really happy baby. So I don't like when she's awake and she comes and she sees me and she smiles real big. It really kind of washes work away, and it's not that hard to kick it into dad mode because she's just so happy to see me, and we just play for a little bit, and I'm able to click into dad mode pretty quickly and relatively stress free, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
A
absolutely.
relatively easy transition, if you will.
Now, one thing that I did want to talk about, especially for those that are unfamiliar with the beer industry, is that beer can be a labor of love, like a huge labor of love. You even touched on it when we first started talking here that it can be for, 40 to 50 hours a week, but you generally enjoy that physical labor aspect because a beer, again, for those who are unfamiliar, can generally be finished. And I'm talking day one to it's being enjoyed in a pub or at home in roughly a month's time. If you design the recipe, then great. That is your baby. In this example, a
Yep.
metaphorical baby. And you're enjoying it and you envision the possibility of what it will look like, but you get that all in that very short time frame. And wonder of wonders, that beer helps you relax at the end of the day. But with our kids and raising our kids, we're talking years and years and years of dedication and involvement until we see any sort of, I hesitate to use the word benefit, but that's what I'm gonna focus on now.
Sure. Yeah.
Before we see a benefit to, our hours of labor and the work that we're putting in here. And again, I hate that I'm using the word work, but it's just something that I can immediately grab and, kinda toss out there to the audience. So, when you come home and you're really stressed and it's not as easy to click into dad mode, what do you cling on to in your brain? Is there a time where you look at Charlotte and are like, "Oh, man, someday it's gonna be like this?" Or do you grab at a thought in your mind or something like, do you see a picture of her from when she was a newborn and think like, "Oh, man." remember when she was this small? What does your process look like for being work mode versus family mode?
Well, it's a lot easier right now, and you know how it is with like young kids, where it's like everything's kind of a blur. I've forgotten everything that happened more than 2 weeks ago, and so currently, uh, she's really happy and she's a lot of fun. So that level of sort of stress and like the work aspect of it and like getting through, like she just wants to play, and so that makes it easy where it's an easy transition where it's I'm able to just look at the pure joy on her face when I kick in dad mode and play with her and chase her around and throw her up in the air and tickle her. I mean, that's kind of the stage we're in right now. So, I mean, it's a really instant gratification when it comes to that. And I think, you know, it's you transition kind of from, well, you have to do this or your baby's going to die. It's just, as sort of morbid as that sounds, your primary goal for so long is simply keeping a baby alive. And now, you're just trying to be there as somebody who's goofing off with her at this point. Um, I think we're getting close to the point where it's more important to start working on things like learning, so, that'll be another hurdle for sure. So she's 13 months old. And right now, we were working a little bit on speech things, but it's really, I hate to say that that's it because obviously there's a lot of things. So it's like, we kind of babble at her and say things and hope that she parrots it. But outside of that, it's mostly just having fun and keeping her in a good mood, so that she doesn't turn into a little hellion.
Yeah, I feel that entirely. Maxine at 16 months old is more about a constant a constant endeavor to make sure that things are tacitly making sense for her. Where, I point at that, and, okay, well, this does this, and this does this. And she's a very kind of intuitive individual where she's always trying to make sure that things work and trying to understand how it works. And I feel like my biggest job, the thing that I struggle with the most is always trying to make sure that I'm taking the time to remember that's all she cares about.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
always
exactly.
I peel myself back all the time, especially when it comes to minor frustrations, like, minor and or major frustrations. Like, she didn't ask to be born. She never asked for that. So, if I'm part of the reason that she exists on this planet at all, I better make sure I'm showing up so that she can have the best life possible going forward. And even though I know that she will eventually someday be a kid and a tween and a teenager and then eventually an adult, she's not that right now. And it all does move so fast, but she cares about this in this moment, and I better show up for it.
Yeah, definitely. And then you saying all those words out loud now just absolutely terrified me. that's the that's the prospect, right? It's like that's what's so challenging, right? So again, it's like with work, it's like I've been doing it for 10 years, basically. I'm 32, so I mean my entire adult life basically has been spent working in a brewery. As they say, is I've got my 10,000 hours. And so um, in brewing, you would know this, you sort of operate on standard operating procedures. You're very by the book. Everything is done. You're very strict and narrow on sort of your practices and processes on certain things. And then, I'm a little bit more free in that now that I know what I'm doing. But it took me a long time to get to the point where I feel like I can kind of freestyle. But it's like that's the way that you sort of learn things, and that is the best way that I find for myself to learn, is sort of by following these very tight and narrow practices. And uh and that's impossible with a kid. And so, you don't know when the moment comes to change, where it's like I said, right now it's just, hey, I'm goofy dad. That's like 90% of my job is just being goofy dad. And like, I mean, it's the best, but it's like I don't, they don't tell you when it's like, all right, I enjoy this week because next week, you know, she's going to be 2 or 3, and you're having to explain to her why we don't do certain things and stuff like that. So it's that sort of, as you say, it goes in the blink of an eye, and then you're raising a preteen and then an adult, and things like that. It's like oh man, it goes really quick, and it's impossible to know when you arrive there, and you have to be completely nimble, and on your feet. And it's just like this constant. It feels like this constant game of, again, like kind of like what I said with our new brewing equipment and all this stuff. It's like almost starting a new job, you know. So it's really the same thing I found with Charlotte. It's like every time she learns something new, or she changes in these certain ways, or she moves on to these new activities, you're having to learn on the fly, and it's like starting a new job every week. Sometimes it seems, and it just is. Yeah, it's just sort of, when you get too far out, and you zoom out a little bit, it seems like this horrifyingly gigantic task of raising a human being. Um, but living in those moments like we get to right now currently, and of course I'm sure that's how it is throughout parenting, with sort of varying degrees of difficulty. But it's nice to just you know zoom back in those moments and say, okay, like today we're just chasing Charlotte around. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because part of the reason that I wanted to talk to you is that you and I have that kind of dovetailed experience where you're still in the brewery, you're still working, and your daughter is 13 months, and I'm at home, and I'm with my daughter all the time. And, I kinda get it's so easy for me to kinda get lost and mired in the, like, "Oh, man, how am I gonna get this next meal out there, and how am I gonna make sure that I clean up after the meal, and how am I gonna pick up all the stuff that was destroyed during the day?" And how am I gonna keep the dog from bowling her over when she wants to go to the door? And how do I make sure that all of these little milestones are met? And it's not that I get too lost in the minutia of all those things, but I'm so close to my own problem that I love the opportunity to talk to somebody like you and peel it back and be like, all right, I'm not alone. Lots of other people have gone through this type of stuff. Had I done it this other way, we still would be dealing with these exact same issues. It's just, when do you deal with it, and how much energy do you have at what point of the day to deal with it? And I think it's very important to note that one of my main things that I tried to beat back from my own father, a I I hate to say it, but kind of one of the negative but behavioral traits that I picked up from him was a tendency to let my frustration just kind of change my personality at a real quick clip. All of a sudden, I can go from, like, the happy, jovial, tossing dad like you're talking about, to just this, especially when it comes to the dog now, I can go to this just like, "No, you do this," and, like, really hit that voice, and as another friend of mine says, go full height, and, like, all of a sudden change my demeanor, and my daughter doesn't understand what is happening there, you know, and she doesn't deserve that. So I struggle with that every single day, to just be like, "Okay, these are minor things. In the grand scheme of time, you know, it doesn't matter. None of this is gonna matter. Nobody's gonna care that she, pulled half of the toilet paper off the toilet paper roll and chucked it into the toilet, or that, you know, she was coming toward the back door, or that she was trying to color the wrong thing with the crayons. Nobody cares about that. Nobody cares. So I should care only as much as it matters in, like, is this gonna matter tomorrow? Is it gonna matter 5 years from now? No. So I try to think about that every day. Do you have anything that might have been baked into you from your parents that you try to, like, shirk off?
Oh, where do we start? Now, well, I mean, a big thing for me, and I don't know if we've talked about this, but my parents were divorced, and so I mean that's kind of where it all starts for me. And like I mean, again, use the term blessed when discussing a divorce. My parents were very amicable. My mom moved into a house like a mile away. Like I saw my parents all the time. If I ever, wanted to go, like just felt like seeing my dad, my mom would say, "Well, call him," and if he says yes, we'll pack a backpack. So like things like that. They're very cordial, but just in general, um, I see the way that um, you know, you're able to sort of look back and see at times where my mom was probably not a good wife, my dad was probably not a good husband, and I'm sure they each had their own reasons why their marriage worked out, and it's those are the things that I try to beat away. And that's kind of I think where it starts with parenting is the foundation of the parents, and creating a good and safe and loving household for your children to be brought up in. Um, and so that's a big one for me. just on like that's just very baseline is having a healthy and loving relationship with my wife, um, which is I mean, which is hard with a child, just but just in general, like making sure we're on the same page, and that's my teammate, is super important. And I just, I think that we have our narcissistic tendencies, and I'm constantly having to beat away the feelings of selfishness, and I don't always win, and I get frustrated, um, because you feel like you lose a bit of yourself, and it's like, oh, I was always in the bowling league, and I used to go golf, and you go and have bonfires with your friends, and you have these sort of traditions that you had with like your groups of friends, and some of that um, gets a little bit lost, right? And so, um, just trying to remember that your family is the most important thing in the world right now, and that that things just change, and that's okay. And try not to be selfish about your own sort of endeavors, or without losing yourself entirely, because you still need your own things, but um, being able to do do my best to not just be completely selfish all the time. And when I come home from work and don't want to play, it's like it's not about whether or not you want to play. Like, go play. Like, that's your job.
Yeah, I thought about
Um,
this before we sat down to talk tonight. I was like, one thing that a lot of other brewers deal with is they'll make their beer, and that beer is their baby, and it's their creation. It's their thing that they want to send out into the world, whether it be a lager, an ale, whatever, what have you. This is all metaphorical gobbledygook that I'm talking about, but I think you'll get
of
what I'm
course.
saying. And a lot of times people will send these beers out into the world, and then you get these reviews and they start coming in like, oh, lager shouldn't have this flavor, or an ale shouldn't have this, or, it tasted like blah, 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 whatever flowery, inappropriate language you want to toss in there. But you know what I would take is a million and one-star reviews for a beer that is just going to be replaced by the next one that's coming in that next 4-week cycle, rather than a one-star review for my daughter when I'm done parenting her and she's an adult out there in the world.
Well, we can agree to disagree, I guess.
Is that what you want? You want her to get on Untapped? Not very good.
Yeah,
Didn't
yeah,
listen often.
yeah.
You're like, I get it, there's gonna be those times, and Maxine has really started to do that, where it's like, I didn't let you dunk your head in the toilet. Sorry, kid, you're not gonna do that today. I understand that you wanna cry about that, but ultimately, what I would really love is that she just understands and forms a kind of an opinion of me being a parent, that I always cared, that I always showed up. That is one thing that my dad gave to me that I'll never lose, and my mom gave to me. They were always there and they always cared. And even if they didn't speak my particular language, they tried. It's like in a movie when somebody's trying to talk to an alien and you can tell that there is communication there, even though they're not saying the same words.
Yeah.
Like, it was always there. And that's what I'm just trying to formulate, especially being so close to her all the time, and like being so involved in every little step. Like, I know I'm lucky. I know I'm lucky, but I can't help being frustrated. I know that a million people in the world would want to be a stay-at-home parent, but it's extremely difficult work. And this comes from somebody who used to work in a brewery. You work in a brewery. I know it's tough work. And I'm not trying to warn anybody away from it, but
Yeah.
I am trying to say that even when you're in those moments, it's all going to be worth it at some point. It's just not as quick as making a beer.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's like you still get the reward of the tough work. And I mean, it's like what a blessing it must be, for Max to have you around. I mean, it's one of those, I know so many, a lot of people. It was more common sort of our parents' generation to have stay-at-home parents. I did not, my parents worked, but my wife, her mom stayed at home. I have an older sister who stayed at home, and y- I mean, those are my only two closest examples, and it's like, well, those kids turned out pretty great, And I think that that's so important, and that's what makes it so challenging in sort of today's society, where you got to be a two-income family, and you can't afford a mortgage, and student loans are ridiculous, with their interest rates, and so significantly less common these days. But it's like, I mean, what a blessing to be able to do that, because I don't think it's what's hard, and that's why I try to sort of again beat away that selfishness, because I believe that the attention of your parents is super critical, and what better way to give your child attention than by being there every day, Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful thing to be able to spend your time with your family, with your kid, and to be a stay-at-home dad. I mean, it's amazing, man. I've told you, how much I just think that's so cool, and it's a massive decision and a lot of work, but it seems like generally in the long run, it's just your kids are better off when you spend more time with them. She's better off with the 40 to 50 hours a week with you than she is with you.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'll offer you this, and I'll further contextualize my statement. I don't mean to say that, being a stay-at-home parent is more difficult than working in a brewery. It's just being a stay-at-home parent for me is more difficult than working in the brewery was for me. Of course, I dealt with everything, but, like, I was able to hang my head up
Yeah.
at the end of the
Well, sure.
day, and go home, and now my home is my work, and the
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
are kind of always interlinked in a way that I wasn't expecting, and I guess I didn't anticipate the level that I would just sort of naturally associate those 2 things as the same. And there are always pockets every single day where it's just like, "This is the most magical moment of my entire life," and then the dog bowl gets flipped, or, "This is the most adorable thing I've ever seen," and then there's a crayon next to the wall, or, something along those lines, ad nauseum, and this is nothing that any parent who has paid attention to their child hasn't experienced, and I'm sure you've been there, how many dogs do you have? You got 2
Is it,
dogs?
I got two. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do they constantly bowl your daughter over yet or what?
Oh my god. Well, dude, we have two Bernese Mountain Dogs, so we got about 250 bucks worth, or 250 bucks, 250 pounds worth of fluff, and they're really good. I mean, there's part of the reason that we sort of wanted to go with them for our dogs is because they're gentle giants. They're family dogs. They're very good. They're very sweet dogs, but they just are so big. It's impossible. Um, and I mean, and it's just she loves them so much that she goes barreling towards them, and they don't even know she's there, and they turn around, and just earlier today, our younger dog turned around and just hit her straight in the face with his mouth, which did not feel great. But the the dog bowl thing killed me, yeah, because we have water bowls that we keep out for them, and she just loves, like, she goes and just like splashes her hand in the bowl. She'll like pull them off. We have them sitting on like our the hearth of our fireplace, and so a number of times she's like pulled them down off that, and just water all over the carpet, which is really great.
Another weird thing about being like, the transition to parenthood is I always envisioned, and I had talked about it in one of the previous episodes, that, like, my dog is gonna love my kid is gonna love my dog, and what I ended up with is my kid being obsessed with my dog and my, aging dog not giving a lick about whether or not his sister is anywhere near him and could, probably benefit from her being farther away from him very often. I guess this is the point of this whole conversation is that when you're mired in chaos and you can't extricate yourself from work, or you're so passionate about something that you get so stuck in whether or not you're doing it and doing it well, and you want to make sure that it's always going to work. In your case, working at the brewery and raising a child. In my case, trying desperately to raise this child, even though I hadn't been a big kid person before she arrived. I always wanted kids, but I never knew how much work it would be. I'm one of those guys.
Yeah. So you're like most men.
Yeah.
I mean, generally speaking, yeah.
But I'm obsessed. I think she is the greatest creature on the planet. I think she is the best thing I will ever do. I think that she has a future much greater than anything I've achieved in my entire life. And I think I've done okay. But that selfishness is what I try to peel back. I try to be selfless. I try to thrust into every single day, and sometimes it falls apart almost immediately. But I try to move into every single day with that understanding that, like, my story is at its midpoint. Hers just began. And if I can't give her a hell of an intro into the world, that's my fault. And I don't want to be that asshole.
Yeah, that's and what better way to do it? I mean, that's like, you're diving in head first, into the deep end, and that's why I say it's so admirable. But I have to say I agree with you so much, about how impossible it is to understand. And of course, everybody says it, and it's so hilarious, and it's so cliche, and it's so true. It's just like the profound love that you have for your kids that is just like immeasurable and unimaginable. Like I always say that I feel like the at the end of the Grinch, where his heart grew three sizes too big. Where it's just like it's just hard to imagine loving someone else, um, so much and so selflessly, and then you still hate them at the same time sometimes, and it's just this hilarious duality of like profound love, and nothing has made me more miserable at a time, not miserable at a time, miserable in moments, but like just has really just raised my blood pressure and and caused me sleepless nights, and both like literally and sort of physically and emotionally sleepless nights. Um, yeah, all of the stress and the work, and but it's the most, I don't know, it's the most incredibly impactful thing I've ever experienced, and it's bizarre. I don't know, it really is hard to put into words, honestly.
Well, Rob, I gotta be honest, I can't imagine a better sentiment with which we should start wrapping up this conversation with. But before we go, I thought I'd hit you with some rapid fire questions. Does that sound good to you?
Let's do it.
All right. Any parenting advice that you got before you actually met Charlotte that really resonated with you and that you'd want to share?
Sleep training. It didn't resonate with me until we got to that point, but sleep training your child is amazing.
Any parenting advice you got from either of your parents that has stuck with you until now? I know we had already previously discussed, some of the things that we learned from our parents that we kind of want to shirk off. Is there anything that you carry with you to this day?
Just being loving and present. That's the biggest thing I think that my parents always instilled in me. Going to baseball games, going and just being present is often the best thing that you can do as a parent.
Most fun moment you've had with your whole family? You, your wife, your daughter, your dogs, all together. Can you hit me with one?
We went and did, this spring. We went down to, I have some family property south of here, and we went and wandered the woods and did a little bit of morel mushroom hunting, and it was really adorable watching Charlotte grab at leaves and stuff like that. She was in the front facing baby carrier on my wife, and the dogs roaming around in the woods, and we just don't get to do that sort of off leash roaming thing very often, and that was really beautiful and a fun thing that I always enjoy, that I got to drag my whole family to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for coming on the show here. It means the world to me to have a conversation and kind of re-gear my perspective. And I'm glad that you shared your thoughts on being a parent with anyone who was willing to listen. Thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Hey, I really appreciate it. It was really great chatting with you.
Now, generally, those comic book stories visiting parallel versions of yourself boil down to the fact that the grass isn't always greener. You should appreciate what you've got. Or you should acknowledge that the steps you've taken to get where you are were never taken lightly. Rob really helped me remember to dig deep in the small moments with Maxine. You know what? My dad would have done the exact same thing. Superheroes. The both of them. I know some of you Michigan-based listeners are wondering if you can pick up any of that Metazoa beer in our neck of the woods. Unfortunately, you can't. But if you make that trip south, you keep an eye out. I know Rob and his family would appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of My Dad, I'm Dad. New episodes are released weekly during the season run. If you like what you heard, you can follow along with us over on social media. We have an Instagram and a Facebook at MDIDpod, or you can send us an email, especially if you want to be a guest on the show, mdidpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks as always to Andy Bird for the use of the music in this show. Now, this week's Wally Wisdom is not one that Dad said directly to me, but it's one he would have signed off on. You see, Dad, especially in those last few years, could always be counted on to want to watch any of the Avengers flicks. And he may not have ever said, "I love you 3000" directly to me. But he said, "I love you" a hell of a lot more than 3,000 times. So tell your loved ones you care, and show it as often as you can. We'll see you next time, folks.